All right, working on the Beetle engine, and we are finally putting it together for the fourth time. Yeah, and so a couple of things to note here. As you can see here, got the it's turned up on its side. This is the top. That's the bottom, and we're getting the case nuts and bolts put on. A couple of things to note as you go through this on, and I was going to do it with it open and just didn't get to it. Really, there's not a whole lot on the inside of this. You got your main crank that goes right here. And then as you can see, these are your connecting rods for your pistons. A couple of key things to note. I don't know if you can see this right here or not. There is a forge mark on that. And as you can see, there's a forge mark right there. Those forge marks, when you lay your cam out, those forge marks are supposed to be pointing upward. Say again? Crank rod. Oh, cam. Sorry. Yeah, on your crankshaft, you want these forge marks to be pointing upward, and you want to make sure that these are placed because they have to go in a certain direction. As you can see here, see how you've got some space. You know, that space here is a little smaller than this space over here. It's a little offset. And so you want to make sure they're all pointing up. This is the top. The flywheel is over here, all of your pulleys and everything. And so if you were standing at the engine at the back of the vehicle, this is where you would be. Just if you're wondering, this is cylinder number 1 and number 2, number 3, and number 4. And so starting with the ones that are closest to the flywheel, it's actually 3, 1, 4, 2 is the way it's laid out. Then you've got your cam that is on the inside, and you can kind of see it right up in there. Your cam runs through. These are your lifters here for your valves. On the cam gear that is down here, you've got a single timing mark that has to be lined up with your main crank gear. On your crank gear, you've got 2 timing marks. So what you have to do is basically there's a on your crank gear, you've got 2 timing marks. On the cam gear, it ends up, if I can do this right, you can kind of see it ends up going in between like that. You got to make sure that's lined up. Now, if you're following some older books, they'll tell you the last thing that you do on the engine is to put the distributor shaft in last, and that is actually the first thing that you need to do. As you can see here, here's the distributor itself, and it runs up into here, and that shaft runs in contact with your crank. So as your crank spins, it spins that shaft, which ultimately turns your distributor here. There are some shims that go on the bottom of that shaft, and some books tell you to do it last, where you have to use a pencil and drop the shims in there. And this is after it's all buttoned up and everything like this. It needs to be the first thing that you do because it's a whole lot easier to stick it in, to get the appropriate shims. Ours had 2 shims on it, and it was at the maximum clearance of, what was it, 50 thousandths, I think? 50 thousandths was the maximum clearance. It's called end play, and once you get your distributor pushed in and it's all the way in and clamped down, you'll find that shaft on the inside will move back and forth a little bit. That clearance is, the maximum is 50 thousandths. That's what we had. We didn't feel comfortable with that, so we got another shim and stuck it in there, so there's actually 3 shims. But once you get that in, then you can lay your crank in. Very key point here, one of the reasons why we had to pull this thing apart 3 different times is because as you lay it in there on your main bearings that are here, here, and here, on the bottom side, there are some little dowels that are on the left half of the case that stick up. And your bearings have little pinholes, and those have to lay down in that. You kind of have to do it a little blind at first. A little tip is before you install those bearings on your crank, If you want to, you can take those bearings and just lay them in on the case itself, get it situated, make sure it's pushed down, and then take a pencil and mark where the case and the bearing meets. Just mark on both sides. That gives you a good reference point for all of them. Then go and install them on your crankshaft. Then when you get ready to lay it in, it's a little bit easier. There's going to be left to right as it rotates around the crankshaft, but there's also forward and back that you have to play with just a little bit, especially on this end one close to the pulley there. So you have to make sure that those are set just right. If not, what happens is you get it in, you think it's fine, you start putting this case together. When you start tightening down on these nuts, you'll begin to turn the pulley here to make sure that it's free and it'll lock down. That's key as you're putting this together. You want to have a pulley on, this pulley on the outside, so that as you're putting this together, you can begin to turn. As you can see, it's nice and free. If it starts getting seized up, you need to come back off with it and see what's going on. We did that, what, 3 times? 3 times. It was 4th time a charm. We kind of figured, we called our bug guy just to get some advice, and he said, yeah, we probably didn't have it all the way lined up. So, a couple of things there. You just want to make sure that those are seated right on those pins. You make sure all these forge marks are pointing upward. On your connecting rods, you want to make sure that your cam and your crank are timed together. There's timing marks there. You want to make sure you have the appropriate clearance. The maximum clearance on that distributor shaft is 50 thousandths. Most of them will have 2 shims. You can put, the book says any number of shims in there to get it just right. And plus you'll have a spring in there that puts tension on it that keeps it from moving, but we wanted to bring down that clearance a little bit. So after you get that, we're using that Lubriplate number 105, which is really good stuff. As you do that for your gears, anything you got to stick in like that distributor shaft. As you can see, some of that white, a lot of people just call it white grease. That's for the valve lifters that are in there. We got that on both sides. And then for the last thing, for the case itself. Now, originally, they didn't put anything in between the cases. No gasket, no nothing. They said it was just machined that way. And but now, because we introduced paint to it and separating it, that changes things a little bit. So we decided to use some Permatex. I think I've got some around here somewhere. Yeah, this is a Permatex Forma gasket. It's a non-hardening sealant. It's this black stuff. Looks like that. That's probably backwards, but you can see the black going around, and that will really help seal it up. So that's kind of where it is right now. We're gonna try to get this thing all bolted down, get it sealed up, and then start putting in the pistons. So more to come later.